To my mind, the most interesting part of Apple's June 6th WWDC keynote was their CarPlay 2.0 or next generation CarPlay interface. There are a ton of new features and there's potential for even more, but I actually think it indicates that Apple has given up trying to compete directly with Tesla and build their own car. Let's take a look. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to sort of walk through some screen grabs and some information about Apple's CarPlay 2.0 or whatever they're calling it, next generation CarPlay, and why it's important for Apple and for auto manufacturers around the world, but also why I believe that Apple has given up the fight and ceded building fully autonomous vehicles to Tesla itself. All right, so let's begin with some screen grabs and things. Here you can see like one of the many different interfaces they have. One of the cool parts about the Apple CarPlay 2.0 interface is that it looks like you're going to have a lot of options about how you want this all to look. So here's kind of a modernized, dashboard indicator. You can also do something that's much more traditional looking, where you have a, kind of an analog-y looking speedometer. You've got your total mileage that the car has driven. You've got your trip mileage over here. You've got a clock over in the corner, oil pressure. So I guess this is still an ICE car. Fuel levels. I assume you could replace that with charge level if you had an electric vehicle. A basic indicator for how your directions are going to be going, and even an RPM gauge, all in the same place. In addition, you can have things that look much more like what the CarPlay is right now. If you have CarPlay currently, it'll look a lot like this, although having the turn directions up and a very, very large interface for the music application is pretty interesting in its own right. Plus the fact, of course, they've got new things like your automobile temperature controls down here. By the way, this looks an awful lot like Tesla's, right? They've got the two split sides, and I assume if you hit it, you can create the split thing. You can also use the interface to completely control your vehicle, like the fan speed, the way that the air circulates, the way the seats are heated or cooled, air conditioning, etc. So there's a lot of controls, and obviously what they're trying to do is move into kind of a mode of like what Tesla has, which is a no button interface. So as long as you have a touch screen or some way of interacting with this screen, you can automatically control all of these things without having to have a ton of buttons to do so. Again, they also showed off some really cool and interesting interface ideas, right? So here you've got a very different speedometer, directions, drive mode, temperature for your engine, etc. There's another different mode of doing that. So you can see your current trip. You can actually look at your calendar if you're interested. You can see air quality and things like that, UV index. You can see if your garage door is open. You can see time zones in different places. So if you're in New York, but you're talking to somebody or you make a phone call to Tokyo, then you can check to make sure what time it is in Tokyo. And it looks like it might be 2 o'clock in the morning there. So maybe not a good idea. And then you can have really interesting interfaces like this, where the speedometer is on the left and the RPM gauge is on the right, and you've actually got your maps in the middle, so you can see where you're going and see the other information kind of simultaneously all in one area. But then this is where things get really, really interesting. So you can see here you've got a behind the steering wheel gauge, but then if you have other displays like here and down here, CarPlay will actually distribute itself onto as many displays as there are in these vehicles. So that's really, really interesting stuff. And according to Apple, what's going to happen is that if you have one display, it'll put it on one display and figure out everything. If you have two displays, it'll split it up in some sort of logical fashion. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 displays, it'll fit it to all of those displays. So basically, CarPlay will be kind of a chameleon and will change itself based on the interface options that your vehicle manufacturer gives you. So that's really, really cool, and one of the most interesting aspects of this CarPlay 2.0. And here you can see like a wider screen version of this. So if you happen to have like a super wide screen on the front of your vehicle. I think some Mercedes and maybe some BMWs or something have something like this now. But anyway, you can see how CarPlay will take up the whole space. And then also you have more of an entertainment area down at the bottom. So this gives you more of the information that you need over here. Then things like your current trip and, the temperature outside, what your calendar looks like, a basic music interface over here, and then more of your traditional looking CarPlay interface in this area here. And this here is like a close-up of that bottom screen that was in the previous screenshot. And again, you can see by pressing the 74, the temperature here, you can bring up all sorts of car controls. So that's really, really cool. I mean, currently CarPlay is great for entertainment and stuff, but it doesn't control the vehicle whatsoever. So this is going to be really, really cool that that's going to be an available feature. And again, a few interface options. You can see like current trip, things like that are there, but then you can also have like an indication of the temperature in Oakland and the fact that it's a starry night. So, the whole background turns starry to indicate that it's a starry night outside, although honestly, you could probably just look out the window and notice that one yourself. And then, of course, you can actually have the maps directly in front of the steering wheel if you want, or alternatively, you can have it over here to the right if you happen to have a display over there. And you can also see, again, there's a lot of control over the way this interface looks, very much like my Apple Watch, where you can pick different faces and things like that, and whatever is most appealing to you as an individual, you can pick that for the way that you want to actually have this feed you information. I would assume also if your, spouse, partner, whoever got into the car and it hooked up to their phone, that it would allow them control over this in an entirely different way so they could have a totally different look than you. And again, here, another close-up just showing a different way of looking at all of these things. Very, very interesting. A much more traditional interface here. And then you've got one that I'm not a particularly big fan of. I don't really like this 3D view thing. I think that would be very distracting. I would much rather see it. It's a little bit too bird's eye for my taste. If they're going to do 3D, I'd rather have it kind of lower down so I could see more forward as if it was matching up to what was in the real environment. I don't know. Some people might like this. And again, this is just prototype stuff that they're dealing with here. They haven't actually got to the point where they're manufacturing this for real. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And then finally, they've got the vehicle manufacturers who are currently working with them. The interesting thing for me here is who's missing. GM is missing. That's a fairly large automaker in the United States. Toyota is missing. They're the largest auto manufacturer in the world. And then the Volkswagen Group as a whole is missing, although Audi is there and they are part of the Volkswagen Group, but independent part. But anyway, so it's just interesting to see who's decided that they're going to get on board with CarPlay 2 and who hasn't. But, again, it's quite possible that over time, many more companies will come on board. And then before we leave this, a really, really important point, they're going to announce partnerships and specific models at the end of next year. That's what they said. So I assume that that means the end of 2023. So we're looking at approximately 18 months away before they even announce the vehicles that this is going to be in. Then, even optimistically to say a year after that you would be able to actually purchase a vehicle like that. So you're looking at maybe January of 2025 before you can actually purchase a vehicle with this CarPlay 2 in it. And that's a little bit unfortunate in my mind. All right, so let's talk about this CarPlay versus Tesla's interface and their full self-driving and everything, and why I think this indicates that Apple has given up trying to compete with Tesla. So first of all, the good. This is really fantastic. If you don't own something like a Tesla, Apple is trying to break into a market. If you haven't seen the mess of stuff that's going on in Volkswagen's group with their Carriad software, and I'll do an episode on that in the next couple of days, so definitely subscribe if you want to check that one out. But it's a really big problem, and I think what Apple's trying to do is say, look, if you build this with an interface that we understand and some basic controls that we understand, we'll just plug it in and we'll take care of all the software for you, all the way from operating the vehicle and temperature controls and things like that, all the way up to the entertainment interface and the information interface and things. Of course, I would expect the vehicle manufacturers would still want to be in control of the drivetrain and the electronics and all of that kind of stuff, obviously. But Apple will take care of all of the rest of that and create an ecosystem around that. To Apple's benefit, of course, an ecosystem is great. They can probably sell things on the CarPlay app store just like they regularly do, take their gigantic 30% cut. They make a bunch of money. They also obviously will make licensing fees from all of these companies. And so every single car that gets sold, they'll get some money from all of this. Plus they'll have access to getting a subscription basis or a purchase basis kind of money from people who are using Apple CarPlay apps. And of course, also to the good, this goes out to many, many different vehicle manufacturers and many different types of screen orientations, collections, things like that. So it's very, very flexible. It works great for all of these automobile companies, and it also works great for Apple. It's got to be a ton of work because, you think about trying to design an interface for multiple different types of screens, that becomes rather complicated. automated. Of course, the big question is we've got 18 months before this sort of goes live. It'll be interesting to see if Google and Android come up with competing products by that point. So we have Apple CarPlay, but also Android Auto 2.0 by the time these come out. And so you'll have a choice as you purchase a vehicle, which kind of thing you want to interface with, or potentially both. That could create an expense for auto manufacturers because they might have to build in both of these things, which could be prohibitively expensive or add a significant amount to the cost of their vehicles. So the amount of complexity for Apple to design this, and the fact that auto manufacturers are going to have to design for this, and they might have to do it for Android Auto at the same time that they're doing it for Apple CarPlay, is kind of the bad that I see about all of this. And then the ugly is just the timeline. The fact that we're looking at 18 months to announce these products for real, and then potentially another year to 2 years before these products are actually manufactured, is pretty darn ugly when you consider what you can get out of a company like Tesla already. So what else might Apple put in here in the meantime? I think that this is a little bit of a stealth announcement here, and I think what they're going to probably have enabled before they actually get to the part where they build these vehicles and install Apple CarPlay into this is they're going to have some sort of autonomous driving solution built in. I think that's a pretty reasonable assumption about what's likely to happen. What we're going to get is we'll get this, entertainment interface and control over the vehicle, but if you build your car with a bunch of cameras or potentially radar or other sensors, if you put those in the car in a way that Apple expects, so you create sort of a known stable interface for Apple's software to deal with, and maybe Apple will actually manufacture the hardware and you can just stick it into your car, right? They'll make the cameras, they'll make all the hardware, software interfaces, all of that themselves, and you can build your car with those things involved. And if you do that, you get for free the autonomous software elements of Apple's CarPlay. So this Apple CarPlay 2.0 might not just control the vehicle in terms of temperature and climate control and stuff, and do entertainment and information, but also be able to drive the car autonomously. So it really does become the vehicle's brains. And if you think about automobile manufacturers and the expense of trying to build each of these and do it for every single one of these vehicles, you can see how this is a giant duplication of effort, and each of these companies is going to spend a ton of money. So there is a pretty decent case to be made for them to utilize a solution like Apple if they provide a good autonomous driving software solution. So that would be really, really cool on their part. And of course, the reason I think that Apple has given up on Project Titan here is the fact that they're building this stuff out for many different vehicle manufacturers and becoming sort of a software head to these different vehicle manufacturers. Now, they haven't announced the autonomous driving software stuff yet, so they still very well could say like, okay, we're going to have a car that we're going to build ourselves with autonomous, but we're only going to sell Apple CarPlay 2.0 to these other companies, but it won't do autonomous driving. But I think this is an indication, a pretty clear indication, that what they're going to do is they're going to be giving up on building a car themselves, and they're going to work with these vehicle manufacturers, whoever will say yes, to create an autonomous software hardware package that works on many different vehicles. And then finally, how does this all compare to Tesla, and are they going to be able to compete? Well, the really, really big problem right here is that Apple is not in control of their own destiny. This is not something that they're really all that used to, right? With phones and watches and computers and things like that, they build the hardware, they build the software. I know, Foxconn or whoever builds the hardware, but you know what I mean. They're contracted out directly with Apple so that they're working on Apple's schedule. With working with companies like Porsche and Nissan and Ford and Acura and Jaguar and Infiniti, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're working on somebody else's schedule. They're putting this into a vehicle that's being manufactured by somebody else. So they're really at the mercy of these other vehicle manufacturers in terms of timing and in terms of what's actually available and in terms of the screens that are going to be available and the interface, whether it's a touch screen or some sort of scroll wheel or something along those lines. So that actually causes really big problems in terms of having something that's agile and flexible and able to be updated, very rapidly by what the user wants. Of course, they will be able to do basic interface updates because they can update the software and hardware on the phone itself, which is what's actually controlling this, but they won't be able to go back and dig into the hardware of the vehicle itself and the basic software in the vehicle itself, probably without going in for some sort of in-person upgrade or something like that to the vehicle. So that will become difficult, and it will make it much more slow to make changes to all of these things. And of course, this is all going to take a lot of time. That's the ultimate result of this. And the fact that, maybe by 2025, early 2025, we'll have vehicles out that will be able to work on all of this stuff, assuming that they already have all of the hardware and software software built in to do autonomous driving, they still need to collect all of the data that they need to collect to be able to compete with a company like Tesla. But by then, by 2025, Tesla's got a massive lead. They may very well, in fact, I think they probably will, have solved level 4 autonomy and have regulatory approval to have that on the roads. Whether or not robotaxis with 0 drivers involved, certainly I think by 2025, we're going to have hands-off driving for most circumstances, where the person in the car is able to not pay attention to the road using a Tesla, and the thing will warn them. It'll go like, hey, in 10 seconds, you're going to need to take over because I'm not going to understand what's going on, right? If that sort of thing happens. But for the most part, the driver is not going to have to drive a Tesla by 2025. And this is just when Apple and these car companies could be getting started with this autonomous vehicle solution. So that's a really big problem because that makes them pretty non-competitive. So then the final question, the final piece of this puzzle is Tesla going to license their own hardware and software to other vehicle manufacturers? And if so, who are these vehicle manufacturers going to pick? So I could see this in 2 forms. Number 1 could just be the autonomous driving package. So Tesla's like, you put in these cameras and these ultrasound sensors and things, and we will give you the software to be able to do the full self-driving stuff. You come up with your own interface, you deal with all of that stuff on your own. We'll just give you this package for a licensing fee. The other option is that they could say like, hey, if you build a big screen, 17-inch landscape screen or something, we will give you all of the software all the way up to that. So you provide the hardware, we'll provide the whole thing, and it'll look like a Tesla driving. It'll have the same basic interface, the same experience as per people driving a Tesla, but for other vehicles. Now, of course, one thing that's interesting is I know Tesla has absolutely no intention of licensing out to vehicle manufacturers making ICE cars, whereas Apple was very careful to show things like fuel gauges and oil pressure levels and all sorts of things like that, indicating that their car will play nicely with ICE vehicles. So, if you were manufacturing an ICE vehicle in 2025, 2026, you're going to be stuck going with a solution like Apple or potentially Android Auto. If you have an EV, however, you probably will have the option by 2025 to license Tesla's IP. And if you do that, that's a big decision that you have to make. Also, hint, hint, by 2025, nobody's going to want ICE vehicles anymore, so it's really not going to matter that much. So everything's going to be moving towards electric vehicles. And I think pretty strongly that Tesla's going to be willing to license out at least the autonomous driving part of their software, because honestly, it's just a safety thing, because the world is just a safer place with this software and hardware built into more vehicles. So in my mind, it looks like Apple has the right idea finally, but they're going to be really, really late to the party. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to make a great deal of headway against Tesla. The only caveat would be if Tesla's like, nope, we're keeping our software to ourselves, we're keeping our hardware to ourselves, you guys can't have it, go play in your own sandbox. That's going to give Apple a chance at all of this. But if Tesla is willing to license this stuff, all of these companies, if they can have the licensing fee be approximately the same between Apple that has untested software and hardware and Tesla that's got a lot of data and tested software and hardware, why would they not go with Tesla? So in short, I think what we're looking at here is that Apple has a really good idea, but they're about 3 or 4 years late to the party. And that could cause them to really be non-competitive in this space. Again, assuming that Tesla is willing to license out their hardware and software at some point in the next couple of years. So of course, we'll have to wait and see how all this plays out. I'm making a big assumption that Apple CarPlay is going to include autonomous driving software in it, but I think that that's a pretty reasonable assumption. I also think it's reasonable that Project Titan, which was building their own autonomous vehicle, is likely dead, and that this is the way they're going. But the problem is that they may very well be too late even doing this. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens, but let's check back in early 2025 and see how things are going. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for the support. We've had a lot of conversation recently about VW Group and their software woes, so I'm definitely going to do an episode on that relatively soon. And of course, if you want to join the Patreon team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a Powerwall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.